Alright, so we've done this before, let's do it again. Fresh off the event, I'll go through what was announced at the 7th of September, 8th September because it's 3 a.m. in the morning over here. Still morning, still a.m. iPhones, Apple Watch, and AirPods. Let's start in the order of the way the products were announced, starting with Apple Watch Series 8. What really stood out for me on the new Apple Watches were that there are two new temperature sensors built into it. Now, supposedly these sensors power the new ovulation tracking feature and also the cycle deviation feature, so huge upgrades to the pre-existing cycle tracking feature. What I'm quite curious to find out is whether or not it's possible to actually take a body temperature reading. Not sure if the wrist is the most accurate place to take a body temperature reading anyway, but the fact that there are temperature sensors, is that a standalone reading that can be done? Also, another accident detection feature, crash detection, so it now knows if you've been in a car crash. I imagine it's quite similar to fall detection, but on a much bigger magnitude. I really like the way they put it at the event. They hope it's a feature you'll never need. Also, there's the Apple Watch SE. So it features the new S8 chip, similar to the ones you'll find in the Apple Watch Series 8. It's 20% faster than the previous generation. It also gets crash detection. But the star of the show, definitely the biggest announcement tonight, in my opinion, has to be Apple Watch Ultra. It's a completely new range of Apple Watch that we've never seen before. Up to 36 hours of battery life, and it comes with 3 new bands. Because the Apple Watch Ultra was designed with more extreme activities in mind, there's one designed for outdoor adventures, there's one for more athletic activities, the lightweight one, and there's a waterproof one for water sports and diving, which brings me to the feature on the Apple Watch Ultra that I personally am the most excited about. It functions as a dive comm now. Now here's the thing, the Apple Watch Ultra is selling for $799, which is competing with dive comms that are a lot more expensive than that. So I imagine today's event has completely stirred up the dive comm market. I believe they mentioned that it works up to 40 meters of depth. Now, I'm personally just an open water diver, so 18 meters max for me. Not going to need it till 40 meters. But imagine there would be some divers out there who might need the full 40 meters or even more. Incredibly exciting, but it does feature a slightly different design than we're accustomed to, though. It looks a lot more rugged. It looks pretty big, and it has this chunk sticking out the side of it and has a very rugged looking crown. It's got an extra button and apparently a very loud speaker system that can function as an emergency siren. Also, it's available in just one configuration. GPS plus cellular, titanium finish. That's it. You don't get to pick different finishes. It's not even available in different colors, I think. At least for the time being. I think Apple would eventually introduce more new colors. Also, let me know down in the comments, do you think the Apple Watch Ultra is going to get refreshed every year, just like the Apple Watch series? Or is it going to be once every few years? Moving on from the Apple Watch, we have the new AirPods Pro. Now, they did try to explain a lot of the new features in the keynotes, but I think many of these new features have to be heard to be really appreciated. So there's a new personalized spatial audio. So we had spatial audio quite a while ago and it was truly amazing already. So I think now it's even more amazing because the experience is personalized to you. I think it takes into account individualizing the distance between your ears or the resonance inside your ear canal. Not too sure about it, I am fresh off the event. There's also an adaptive transparency mode, which supposedly lets you filter out what sounds actually make it to you when you're listening to transparency mode. Kind of like a selective, what kind of noise you want to hear around you mode. There's also touch control. So previously you had to pinch the stems. That was the only way of having any input on your AirPods Pros. So now you can actually swipe them up or down to change the volume, which changing the volume when you're wearing an AirPods Pro without actually using your phone or using a watch was rather difficult. You had to actually ask Siri to change your volume. So now there's actually a way to control the volume as you're wearing your AirPods. And I think equally as big of an upgrade to the AirPods Pros are the charging cases that they come in. It now supports precision finding using Find My, so basically kind of like an AirTag situation. There's probably an AirTag built into it now. There's also a speaker in the charging case. Hooray for that, because I misplace my AirPods all the time, so you can ping them using Find My, and the charging case actually has a speaker that lets out a beep, letting you know where it is. And previously, it charges through the lightning port and also through while it's charging. Later on, they introduced MagSafe as well. Now it still supports MagSafe, but interestingly enough, you could also charge your AirPods now using the Apple Watch charger. So more ways to charge your AirPods. Very happy with that. And we're moving on to the iPhones. Now for the iPhone 14s, there's a bit of a switch up this year because we get iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. So gone is the mini. We no longer get normal-sized iPhone and small-sized iPhone. It's now normal-sized iPhone and big-sized iPhone. A bit of a throwback to the good old iPhone 8, iPhone 8 Plus days. They also made a brief mention in the keynotes that they've tweaked the internal design so it now has better thermal performance. The screen can hit 1200 nits, and it's available in 5 colors. Now, the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus do not get the latest A16 Bionic chip that was announced together in this keynote, but with the Pro models, the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus use the same A15 Bionic chip that was introduced in the iPhone 13s. The camera system in the iPhone 14s now gets an upgrade. The front camera can now autofocus, a feature that I think is about time. Better low-light performance on the main camera because it now has a larger sensor and a larger aperture. And they've mentioned this new, I believe it's an upgrade made to the image processing pipeline called the Photonic Engine. And they mentioned applying Deep Fusion earlier on. So Deep Fusion is now being applied more upstream than it already was. Supposedly it renders the colors in your photos in a better way. Probably not a day and night difference, like instantly you'll be able to tell, oh, okay, that looks like an iPhone 14 camera, but an evolutionary upgrade, and that's always welcome in my opinion. They did introduce a new stabilization mode for video called Action Mode. Now, prior to this, the iPhones already had really impressive stabilization in video. If you were to wiggle your phone about quite a bit when you're recording, by the time you play it back, you might notice that a lot of it has already been smoothed out. So this, I imagine, is something quite similar to what you might find on the action cameras like the Insta360s and the GoPros. I do think, and again, fresh off the keynotes, that if you do enable this brand new action mode stabilization, there would be a rather heavy crop on your image's field of view, because then it has to move the frame around in post to better stabilize for it. And as always, these kind of things always work better when you're in very bright environments, so you're not subject to the artifacts of motion blur when you stabilize that footage. But I can see why that's a great feature to have in your pockets, because when you're doing something really extreme and you want to grab some footage of it, naturally the first thing you record with is the iPhone that's with you. Another very bold move in terms of hardware is the US models will no longer have a physical SIM tray, because the iPhone 14s now support multiple eSIMs. Now, eSIMs are nothing new. I've been using it for quite a few years now, and I quite like the idea of it. It hasn't been possible with multiple eSIMs yet. So previously in my region, if I wanted a dual SIM iPhone, one of them has to be a physical SIM and the other has to be an eSIM. So I'm glad now there's the option to have multiple phone numbers all in the form of eSIMs. Since they mentioned US models specifically, I imagine many international models would still ship with a physical SIM tray. The new iPhones also have improved gyro and accelerometers, so they also get crash detection. And here's something completely new to iPhones: SOS via satellite. Now this, I don't think it's being rolled out worldwide, but still very impressive. The way they're able to let your iPhone connect to a satellite without using a ginormous antenna, which admittedly will look rather hideous on an iPhone, is you had to physically hold the phone up and point it at a satellite for it to establish a connection. And you have to actually hold that connection for 15 seconds. And I believe they mentioned in the keynote, if you're in deep foliage, it might take up to a few minutes. But again, it's really the kind of feature you will only use in extreme emergency situations. So I think it's a pretty good trade-off. The only way they were able to implement this without some additional ginormous hardware is to actually have the user help it out For less life-threatening situations, you can also set up Find My to share your location via a satellite. Considering the way it works, it's not going to be continuous. You would actively, consciously make a decision to share your location at that very moment. Then you have to whip out your phone, do the satellite tracking trick for a moment, and then that would be your last known location. Now the most exciting stuff, the Pro iPhones. Now iPhone 14 Pro, it still comes in iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. It would be a massive plot twist if they cancelled the Pro Max and did like a Pro Mini. Kind of glad they didn't do that. The new hero color is called Deep Purple, and the biggest curveball they threw this year around is something they call the dynamic island. Basically, the pill-shaped cutout on the top of your iPhone. It's no longer a notch. Goodbye, very, very iconic notch. In a sense, it's still here to stay on the iPhone 14 non-Pro models, but on the Pro models, you now have that. I'm not too sure what to describe it because it's so new. So the official name for it is Dynamic Island, and it shows additional info and controls, which, come to think of it, actually kind of reminds me of the touch bar on the older MacBook Pro models, but it's a completely new iPhone experience, and I think it's something that us as iPhone users would have to get used to. One potential issue I can see with this is because you can touch on the info being displayed on the island to interact with it, it's also where the sensor modules and the front-facing camera sit, and the Face ID and everything. So if you're constantly touching on that area, your front camera might be covered in fingerprints. The display on the new Pro iPhones themselves are actually incredibly impressive in terms of how big of an upgrade they're getting. So you now get an always-on LTPO display that refreshes as low as 1 Hz. You get 1600 nits of XDR, HDR compatibility with your iPhone now, which is incredibly right. That is on par with the new MacBook Pros, the 14 and 16 inches, the iPad Pro, and the Pro Display XDR. And when you're outdoors, it can even hit a peak brightness of 2000 nits, which is ridiculously bright. I just pray that you never get blasted with the full force of 2000 nits when you wake up in the middle of the night to check your iPhone. And yes, these new iPhones do get the newest A16 Bionic chip, the fastest chip ever in a smartphone, of course. It uses the 4nm process, and I'm just pointing out some of the more unique things I see. The display engine. So this is what's present on the A16 Bionic chip to enable features like the Dynamic Island, the new Notch version 2, and the always-on display. So that could be the reason that these features are only available on the Pro models, because the A15 processor on the iPhone 14 non-Pros are not capable of actually driving these displays. So the Pro models actually do contain more powerful technology and hardware to enable these more powerful features. Now, the camera system, this is when it gets really interesting. I think this could be the single biggest upgrade to any iPhone's camera system. The main camera now gets a 48 megapixel quad pixel sensor, and instead of a 26mm main lens, it's now a 24mm main lens. They're saying it's a 65% larger sensor. Now, the 48 megapixels here, it's quad pixel, and by the visual they've shown in the keynote, this might get a bit technical. So the arrangements of the photo sites are still in a Bayer pattern, but for every photo sites, imagine every photo site is quadrupled in their original position. Which means if you process the image in a way that you combine those group of 4s, you're still gonna get a 12 megapixel image, but a much better 12 megapixel image. Lower noise, probably better details. But from my understanding, if you want the true raw 48 megapixels of pure resolution out of that sensor, you can do so as long as you shoot in ProRAW. And I think you can only do that if you're shooting in ProRAW. But that being said, it can actually crop in from the main camera, and you get something ever so slightly wider than a 50mm, equivalent to the 2x camera that I miss so much. So we still get 3 cameras on the back, but effectively when you're shooting in the UI, we have 4 lenses to choose from. So physically, there's a 0.5x, 1x, and 3x, but in terms of software, you see a 2x camera, which functions by cropping in from that main 48 megapixel sensor and using only the middle portion. I am definitely welcoming back the 2x camera form factor. It was my favorite. When they increased it to 3x on the 13 Pros, I always thought it was a bit too tight at sometimes, and I find myself missing the 2x very much. So very happy that it's back. They didn't say too much on the ultra-wide angle camera, but it is new and improved. The macro photos apparently look better, and they did say a 3 times low light improvement on the ultra-wide angle camera. Really excited to see how that translates into real life shooting, because the ultra wide angle cameras, they get better every year since the 11 Pro, but still it's one of the weaker cameras in low light. So very happy that the ultra wide angle is getting more and more usable in low light. The final upgrade to the camera system they mentioned in the keynote concerns cinematic mode. We can now do cinematic mode in 4K. On the iPhone 13's cinematic mode was capped at 1080p, so I suppose with the more powerful A16 Bionic, it now powers cinematic mode going up to 4K 30p, and they've added the option to actually do cinematic mode in the very cinematic looking frame rate, 24p. And that's it in terms of announcements they've made this time round. Some really exciting stuff. For me, Apple Watch Ultra really stood out. iPhone 14 Pro, quite a big shift from the status quo of iPhones. And I'll be looking into these new product launches in more detail and be back to share anything new if I find any. But until then, I would love to hear your thoughts and what products are you particularly more excited about this time round. And is there anything that you are absolutely set on buying? It's been a pretty exciting round of announcements, and I'm very looking forward to seeing these new products in the flesh. And until then, I'll see you in one of my other videos.